joining us to have this conversation this morning is none other than Dr. Wisdom Enang. He is a senior energy consultant and analyst, just the perfect match for this conversation. Good morning, Dr. Wisdom Enang. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right, so we're discussing the impact of government policies on energy consumption and sustainability. So let's kick off very quickly now. Talking about Nigeria now, how does the Nigerian government policies influence the adoption of renewable energy technologies, and what are the most effective policy mechanisms for driving sustainable energy growth?
All right, so the first thing we need to know is government policies affect things on two ends. One is it affects things on the demand end, it affects things on the supply end.
Okay.
Now, if you look at the demand end of the energy spectrum, that means that we're looking at the trilemma of energy. We're looking at affordability, accessibility, availability as well. So consumers optimize more of the affordability because, if it's available but maybe not close to them, and they can somehow maybe go with a mode of transportation, maybe bikes or tricycles to access it, they can go actually and get the fuel, provided it is cost effective. I think right now, because of the economic situation in Nigeria, everyone is looking at the cost component. So the government does this by doing one thing. They increase the price on perhaps the fuel that they're trying to discourage the consumption from, and also try to put in incentives that would reduce the price, the per liter price equivalent of the fuel that they're trying to promote. So, for example, in CNG, there's an initiative ongoing to support the proliferation of CNG, and by so doing, increase the availability, accessibility, even whilst the price differential between that fuel and the PMS is still quite, high, and so the CNG is a lot cheaper. 230 naira equivalent per liter equivalent versus the PMS, fuel. Now, on the supply side of things, what the government does is this: they're trying to put policy in place to create a situation where we translate a market need to translate a need to a market, because we have the need for an alternative fuel because of the cost of consumption of PMS at the moment. And we want to translate that to a market, but before you can translate that to a market, there needs to be a very healthy, and a free market as that, there needs to be a very healthy interaction between demand and supply, so much so that it will create and establish a fair price equilibrium for the customers. So what the government does is they put in, the regulations or policies to, moderate the demand side of things and to moderate the supply, such a way that they create that overwhelming gravitational pull for people to want to favor the alternative fuel that they're promoting.
Okay.
All right, that's a very extensive answer there. Thank you. So this is it. What are the economic and social implications of implementing carbon pricing policies? And there's a part two to that question, but let me hold my thought. Let me have you answer this first part of my question.
Well, there are enormous economic benefits. So the first and foremost is if we begin to put carbon pricing into our framework, it means that we have, put the rhetoric is now changing from being a qualitative rhetoric to a quantitative rhetoric. Just by increasing our price, increasing the PMS price, increasing the electricity tariff, a lot of consumers have become more energy efficient. You see a lot of people switching off their light bulbs and making sure that if a socket point is not absolutely necessary, they switch it off. Even people switch off their filters for a day. Because obviously it's blocked, and it becomes counterproductive if you want to take out an item from the fridge, so a food item. So sometimes we're already imbibing that culture based on the necessity. However, the next step would be to then add one more context. So change from qualitative standpoint that we're already doing right now and make it quantitative. So you're quantifying how much is our carbon footprint exposure, and then how are we stewarding the net zero targets, and also how are we tapping into the whole new fund for carbon credits that projects are giving. So think about it. The people talk about the trilemma of energy, but there's a different conversation, which is the A quadrilemma of energy: accessibility, affordability, availability, and acceptability. And so what we're talking of is being enshrined under the acceptability component of A trilemma of energy, saying, is it acceptable, and how is the world reacting to the acceptability of energy? So what the world is simply doing is saying, we're going to make funds available because we want to decarbonize the world. So whether you're doing a project that is carbon intensive, you're going to be paying penalties for those projects.
Okay.
But if you're doing a project that is going to take out carbon or achieve carbon neutrality, you can tap into those funds to fund those projects. So it's kind of making it that there's an economic basis for you to want to consciously think about decarbonization. And yes, Nigeria can tap in there by making policies that would drive the projects and innovations that are going to prove that ultimately we are carbon neutral in our footprint. And yes, there's a huge fund. And let me tell you what happened. BlackRock, which has a group of funders that fund almost about 60% of energy projects, said that anything that has more than 40% carbon footprint, they're not going to fund it anymore, meaning that, for example, coal projects are not going to be funded anymore. And this was far back in 2020. Now, what do we have is that BlackRock has redirected those funds to things that you can claim carbon credits, or you can even pay those carbon, you can pay those carbon penalties, and it goes into those such funds, but they are made available to promote the growth of renewable projects.
All right, fantastic. So you talked about carbon pricing policies. How then can government ensure that this does not overburden low-income households?
Okay, so this is the thing, right? And this has been the debate. Should we go as hard as other countries need to have gone? And the two things I want to say. First is Africa only contributes 4% of the global carbon footprint. So, I mean, the second one is that Nigeria is currently stewarding its net zero target. If you look at some of the countries that are stewarding their net zero target, Nigeria is actually ranked as one of the top countries there. With that in mind, that re-echoes the rhetoric of what we call a just transition. And a just transition is saying, use what you have to get to what you want without disrupting your economic ecosystem as unduly. So what we found is that in Nigeria, that's why we talk about the gas. Yes, when I talked about the carbon pricing and all of that, I'm saying that those policies are available, and those policies have midwifed and brought to bear funds that are available for projects if we can do it. So I think for Nigeria, it should be more of, to balance the just transition rhetoric, Nigeria should be looking at more, okay, look, how do we put out projects that allow us to tap into these funds where people are not looking at even funding fossil energy projects as much, like before. But then, how do we balance that with the fact that when we're talking about transition from fossil fuel, the other flip side of the energy transition story for Nigeria is energy poverty, where a number of Nigerians do not really have access to reliable supply of energy, talk less of clean supply of energy. So we have to balance that. So think about the carbon credit system like a system that allows us to tap into funds that otherwise we will not be able to tap off. So just cleaning our books. It's just like simply you want to access a loan, you're already having your office operations, you don't change your operations, but the way you do your bookkeeping, you change that so that you can meet the criteria to access the loan. But you don't change your operations because your operations is down to the scale and the corporate philosophy that you're running on.
Right, quite a very interesting one there, I must say. But let's talk about government policies now. How do these government policies address the intersection of energy and transportation, particularly with regards to electric vehicle adoption and infrastructure development?
All right. So, I mean, the government policies overwhelmingly is favoring gas. I've seen people drive electric vehicles. The issue there is going to be the technical manpower required to, sustain that technology itself, because it's not your usual mechanics. And I think for the longest time that we've seen, what we've seen is that the whole vehicular technology, manpower has been domiciled in the informal sector. So if you go to UK now, people actually go to university, become vehicle engineers, open up their garages, and they're doing very, very big things. And it means that with that, means that not only are they also formalizing the sector, there's room for improvement of the technology, as in terms of learning and adapting things to solve problems as technology evolves, basically. But in Nigeria, think about it, your average mechanic is just someone that learns how to do a particular vehicle and perhaps took 10 years to get there and become free, as they say it. And so that's one of the hindrances. So when you're adopting, electric vehicles, for example, yes, accessibility is there, it's in your homes, affordability is there, well, in the operational cost, not the front end cost. It is not affordable from the front end perspective. Then availability is there. If you can on your generator and power it, so it almost works almost like a normal electrical appliance. However, the biggest problem that we're going to have is that we are going to be limited on the technology itself. And I give you context. If Innocent Motors, for example, were to design an electric vehicle and hand them to you, yes, they can give you outlets, maybe in strategic locations that will serve their customers around those areas. And those outlets are, they're staffed with the right level of engineers that have the right skill set. However, what happens when you buy a Toyota, for example, a Prius, for example, and you want to use either a Toyota Prius hybrid electric vehicle or just a normal electric vehicle? Would you have the same expertise to support you in country? So yes, people are already experimenting the electric vehicle concept, but the biggest brick wall is the technical expertise. Already, even with the PMS engines, we are already struggling. How many times have you gone to your mechanic and they're doing trial by error? It is this one, is that one. So it's really, if a technology that has been there for more than 70 years, we are still struggling. It's very interesting how the government is going to formalize that sector, because I think there's a lot of untapped potential in that sector that has been left largely informal.
You talked about technology that has expired, old technologies, over 70 years old. Let's talk about this a little bit, Joe. What then are the potential impacts of grid modernization policies on energy resilience and sustainability?
Sorry, come again.
So I'm talking about modernization of grid policies, right? Let me take it from the top. What are the potential impacts of grid modernization policies on energy resilience and sustainability?
Yeah, I think for us to ensure that there's sustainable supply of energy, let's look at our ecosystem at the moment. We are underproducing. There are so many losses on that value chain. And even when you get there with the losses, the distribution do not even have the equipment to even transmit or distribute all of the energy that is even more like a 30% residual from the production. Meanwhile, that production at the initial point, or the generation as they call it, has not even met Nigeria's basic requirements. So that's the problem we have at the moment. Now, I see a move by the reps to say, a House of Reps to say, invest, tell the discourse, invest a certain amount in infrastructure development, or of course, exits the scene. Well, it's interesting because typically you have to manage it. It's not just a command and control rhetoric that is going to bring transformation. Transformation is going to be when you build a value ecosystem where those people see a pathway to their recovery of money, not when you use command and control. Say, obviously, what I agree with the need for, for us to modernize our grid system, because as I explained, we start out with producing a quantum, which, by the way, compared to other developing nations of our same size, is so very tiny and small. Meaning, and without electricity and gas supply, you cannot industrialize. No nation has industrialized the economy without electricity and gas supply. It's not possible.
Yeah.
Even when you look at Japan, when you look at India, they don't produce as much as we produce, even if they produce. But look at the quantum of look at the quantum of the gas pipelines that they have across available. And because we're using gas turbines, yes, so it correlates to how many gas turbines and availability of electricity that you have. India has no real meaningful reserve, pockets of uncommercialized reserves, and they have 79,000 kilometers of pipeline. Nigeria has a lot of reserves, top in Africa, 8th in the world, but what do we have? 6,000 kilometers only. How do you compare that? How can we industrialize? So, of course, even from the supply standpoint, where the feedstock supply, there is a problem. We need to be able to get that gas to where we can get the grid. But even the fact is, even the very abysmal quota that we're producing, to distribute it, there are so many losses. That means what the customers finally get is about 30% of the entire product generation. Who is paying for all that losses? So I agree for the need to modernize the grid to even capture what we are already producing 100% or 95 to 100%, and then find other ways. And I think I've been hearing a lot in the government quarters talking about decentralized energy production, which I agree with. It's really important that we begin to think about decentralized grids. Now that the Electricity Act of 2023 has empowered the governors to go ahead and produce electricity, that's fine. That should be taken. But I do not agree that it would only be a command and control rhetoric that would drive the change that we require. It has to be commercially driven.
Right. Commercially driven is what we should, be targeting and looking forward to. That's a fantastic place to wrap up the conversation this morning. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Wisdom Enang, and for sharing your thoughts with us on this topic. It's been insightful. Thank you.
Thank you. Deeply appreciate it.
Enjoy your weekend.
And you too. God bless.
Right.